Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about 7 things you need to know before you play Diablo 4. Number 1, staggered bosses will have every form of CC on them. Now, if you're not familiar with the stagger mechanic, when a boss would get crowd controlled, they don't. Instead, they start filling up a stagger bar. This is a sort of bar right below their health bar, which fills up slowly, and when it's completely filled up, it turns blue and drains fairly rapidly, but during that period, the boss is going to be staggered. And this is really important because the developers have said this is a weakened state, and it is definitely a weakened state because when a boss is staggered, it is considered that they have every single form of CC, and those include things like knocked down, stunned, slowed, immobilized, chilled, that's an important one, dazed, taunted, tethered, feared, frozen, and knocked back. This is very important because many builds can actually build around these different CC ailment effects or crowd control effects. I know, for example, I play an Earth Druid, and whenever a target is under the effects of crowd control, I do increased damage, for example. So crowd control is broadly defined as any of these effects, but so it doesn't actually matter which one, but certain builds definitely deal bonus damage when a target is knocked down, for example, or when they're slowed, when they're immobilized. I know a lot of different builds, particularly actually Storm Druid, they actually get some really great bonuses to their damage when attacking immobilized enemies. And so that it's very important to just understand that when a boss is staggered, that is your time to use your cooldowns, and it's definitely worth trying to get a boss to become staggered so that you can get all of these crowd control effects on them. Before we get to tip number 2, I just wanted to mention that we are doing a giveaway. If you want to win some Diablo 4 merch, check out the link in the description, and let's move on to tip number 2, status effects. Now, there are a lot of different status effects in Diablo 4. Some of them might be familiar from previous Blizzard titles, and some of them are completely new. I want to go through the ones that are not straightforward. Berserking. This is a barbarian specific status effect which grants 25% increased damage, which is huge, and 15% increased movement speed for a certain duration of time. Berserking can be activated through a number of different abilities and attacks. It doesn't last very long, but it's very, very strong, and if you find ways to make it last longer, which exist within the barbarian skill tree, it's definitely worth trying to seek out and trying to make a type of berserking build because of how powerful it is. Okay, let's talk about chilled. Chilled is a movement speed reduction crowd control effect. However, targets that are repeatedly affected by chill will eventually be frozen. So that's another status effect. When an enemy is frozen, they cannot move or attack. So they go from slowed to basically stunned. They can't move or attack. That's actually called frozen though. And then if these NPC enemies are frozen, they can also be shattered, and shattered is an instant kill. So chilling and then eventually freezing, frozen, right, is the status effect, leads to an instant kill by shattering them. So that's pretty new and interesting. There's also a status effect called darkness. If you've ever fought against the Tomb Lord, he uses darkness. What it does is it reduces visibility and prevents skills from being used while affected. Now, if you look at some of this gameplay footage, you can probably tell you can actually still use Unstoppable to escape any of these status ailments that I'm going through. Of course, immune also does the same thing, which we'll get to as well. Now, if you've played World of Warcraft, you might be familiar with the word dazed. Dazed in World of Warcraft is different than dazed in Diablo 4. Dazed makes it so you cannot attack or use skills, but you can still move around. And so there are certain monsters you'll encounter that daze you. Just know that you can still run away from them, right? But you can't attack or use skills when you're dazed. Of course, again, Unstoppable is the way out of there. Fortified is important because it makes it so that you take 10% reduced damage. This is definitely a nerf from it used to be, I think, 40% when Fortified first came out. But Fortify will only activate when you have more Fortify than your current life. So keep that in mind. Your Fortify amount has to go beyond what your current life total is in order for you to start taking that reduced damage. Okay, let's move on and talk about immune. Immune is basically invulnerable. You cannot be damaged, and all negative effects are removed and prevented within the effect duration. Very similar to Unstoppable, but you can't be damaged at all, which is very, very nice. So knocked back. Knocked back means you got toppled. You cannot move or attack until the standing animation finishes. So when you get knocked back, you fall over, and it kind of sends you backwards, and you can't move or attack until your character stands back up again. There's also stealth in Diablo 4. There weren't really a lot of stealth creatures, if I can remember, in the past in Diablo games. Actually, I think there was in Diablo 3, those serpents. But stealth in Diablo 4 means you cannot be directly targeted by enemies. Using an attack or taking damage will instantly remove stealth. This is something I found very fun. If you see a stealth unit or a monster, you can actually use an area of effect ability by holding down shift and then using that ability, basically using your cursor to aim, and you can actually deal damage to them and bring them out of stealth before they actually get a powerful attack off on you. And usually when they exit stealth, their attack is more powerful as well. Something I've noticed. That's usually like something poisonous and does quite a bit of damage. And then the last one that I think is important to go over if you are not familiar with Diablo 4 is vulnerable. Affected enemies take 20% increased damage, and you can have this status effect on you as well. You can put it on enemies, but vulnerable can also be put on your character, and that's going to put a purple sort of shattered glass look on your health globe, and that's to denote that you are vulnerable at that current time, taking 20% increased damage. So if you get that, you might want to be a little bit more careful. Don't run into a group of monsters while you got that sort of purple shatter look on your health globe. Okay, so those are status effects that can happen to you. You can put on enemies. Now there's also certain terminology within Diablo 4 that is different from previous games that's important to understand as well. There's things like healthy. This means that you have 80% or more of your life. This also applies to creatures you fight like bosses, elites, champions, etc. Just know that healthy is 80% plus life, and then injured is 35% or less life. This is important for classes like rogue, where you have an ability that says you deal 10% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. Well, you might think, well, that's everything. You're either healthy or you're injured, right? Well, according to Diablo 4 terminology, healthy is 80% plus life and injured is 35% or less life. And so that ability would only give you 10% increased damage when enemies are basically full health or about to die. So keep that in mind. That sort of mid zone, you wouldn't get that 10% bonus damage. There's also another sort of keyword in Diablo 4 called close. This means melee range, and distant, which means outside of melee range. It can be kind of confusing. You might think distant is very far away, but it could literally be like 2 feet in front of you as long as you're not within melee range. So distant can be pretty close still. And then finally we have overpowering. This gives you bonus damage based on the sum of your current life and fortified life. And all attacks for all classes have a 3% chance to overpower, and this percentage cannot be improved, but can actually be guaranteed through skills. So for example, Druid Pulverize has an enhanced Pulverize ability in order to make it so that every 12 seconds you have a guaranteed overpower, and you can definitely build your character around this by increasing your maximum life, increasing how much fortify you generate in order to make that overpower attack even more powerful. Okay, let's move on to tip number 3 that you need to know: combat text colors. Now, most of the time you're just going to see white numbers as you attack, but you will occasionally see yellow, blue, and orange, and you might be wondering, why are these different colors? Well, yellow is to denote a critical strike. This is important to know because critical strikes can give you lucky hit. For example, pack leader for the druid has lucky hit when you critically strike, and so you want to know, how many critical strikes am I actually getting? So that's denoted by a yellow text. Blue text denotes that you just overpowered with that attack. So if you again are playing that druid build and you want to pulverize, you know that you pulled off an overpower when you see blue text all over, and that will show that you got an overpower attack off. And any class as well can get an overpower. And then you may occasionally also see an orange text, which is a critical hit that also overpowered. So that's the combination. Those are going to be huge numbers almost all the time, I can almost imagine. So those are the 3 different colors and what they mean for each of them. And of course, remember, white is just basically a regular attack. Okay, number 4. This is a very important one. Bosses, champions, and blood-marked players are elite. This is very important because there are so many skills and abilities that give you bonuses against just elites, and it's hard to know what exactly is an elite. An elite's an elite, but what about a boss? What about a champion? What about other players? Well, all of them, blood-marked players, are considered elites, and this can be very important. Let's say you're a druid once again. There's actually a spirit boon for the deer part of the tree, and that is called wariness, which gives 10% damage reduction against elite. This seems to me like one of the best choices for spirit boons because bosses do a lot of damage. So do champions, and of course blood-marked players would do a ton. And so wariness seems to me like a very strong spirit boon for 10% reduced damage against elite, which of course is all the above. So very, very important to know what exactly is an elite. All right, number 5. Blood orbs heal you for 15% of your max life when picked up. This is important because you might think, okay, yeah, I'm picking up a blood orb. Like, who cares? You know, it's just a regular blood orb, but it actually heals you for 15% of your max life. This means that more max life equals more blood orb heal. So it actually, basically, if you're playing a build where you depend on blood orbs, it definitely makes a lot of sense to increase your maximum life to basically increase the value you get per blood orb. And kind of an added bonus here, if you are playing a damage over time type of build, whether that's burning or poison or any type of shadow damage over time, time, just know that they do not have random damage variance. So it's going to tick the same amount every time, and they cannot critically strike. So, they really buffed Poison Creeper in the Server Slam weekend. Well, that Poison Creeper is going to do the same damage tick every single time. It cannot critically strike, so just keep that in mind. Same with Bleeds, but there's also a key passive for the Barbarian that basically makes it so Bleeds can crit, which is crazy and not the standard. That is the exception to the rule. All right, let's move on to number 6. Skills can trigger lucky hit effects. I think this is a very important tip. If you haven't heard of lucky hit, this basically means that something special can happen, a proc basically, when you attack or whatever the condition is. So let's say, for example, if a skill has a lucky hit chance of 50%, and then you have an item that says you have a 20% chance to stun an enemy, then that skill will stun enemies 10% of the time. And the way you can calculate this pretty much every single time is just turn those percentages into decimals and then multiply them. So another example you could use that I actually calculated myself for just being interested, Landslide has a 20% lucky hit chance, which Earth Druid, Landslide is a key ability. And then I looked at Pack Leader. Your critical strikes have a 20% chance to reset the cooldown on your companion skills. So I'm like, oh wow, Poison Creeper is so strong. Landslide is a guaranteed critical hit. What are the chances that you get a critical hit and that resets the cooldown of your companion skills? Well, you take the 20%, multiply that by the 20% on a crit. 0.2 times 0.2 is 0.04. So that actually blew my mind. It made me realize, like, wow, this proc's way less than you might think. This is not going to be good in my opinion. So that's a 4% chance on a crit that you'll have your companion skills cooldown reset. So very, very low chance. It's kind of eye-opening how little lucky hit chance actually is. And so you can kind of be thrown off by the big, 20% this, 20% that, but very, very low chance actually. It's very easy to calculate. If you look at Tornado, for example, the Druid ability, that has an 8% lucky hit chance, super low. And if you were to have a 20% chance to stun with Tornado, well, you just take 0.2, multiply that by 0.08. That has a 1.6% chance to stun, for example, in this scenario. 1.6%, terrible. So Tornado has an absolutely terrible lucky hit chance. So just keep that in mind as you calculate lucky hit chance, that it's probably a lot lower than you think. Tip number 7, in higher world tier, monsters are going to run faster, shoot faster projectiles, which are going to be more accurate, and their abilities and spells have reduced cooldown and are stronger. Not only that, their elite affixes are more powerful. Absolutely insane. Because them moving faster, I just imagine it's just gonna be terrifying. Hordes of monsters are basically going to swarm at you at lightning speed. It's going to be very unfriendly, aggressive, terrifying, I might say. I think higher world tiers are just going to be incredibly and increasingly more terrifying as you continue to play the game. So keep that in mind as you upgrade world tiers. It's going to get scary. Monsters are going to be scary in those higher world tiers. All right, and our last tip, this is an easy mistake to make. If you get a legendary aspect and you extract that from a weapon, you can only imprint that legendary aspect into an item that shares the same tier. And there are 3 tiers to be aware of. There is normal, right? So there's no sacred, there's no ancestral, it's just a normal aspect, right? So if you extract a regular legendary aspect, you can put that into a regular rare item. However, if you extract a sacred legendary aspect from a sacred legendary item, you can only put that into a sacred rare. And the same goes for if you find a sacred rare, you can't put a regular legendary aspect you found. And this is going to be important for when you transition into tier 3, world tier 3 nightmare. Once you enter world tier 3 nightmare and you find a sacred rare, chances are you're going to be like, oh man, this is an upgrade. I want to imprint a legendary aspect into this sacred rare. You're not going to be able to, because in order to do that, the aspect has to also be sacred. And you can see here, I'm so confused in this footage. I'm like, why doesn't it work? Well, I did not know that. And so as you make that transition to world tier 3, just be prepared to not be able to imprint your sacred rares with your regular legendary aspects. Okay, and that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do me a favor, click that like button, subscribe for more Diablo 4 content. Thank you guys so much. And I am live on Twitch every single day. Go ahead and click follow over there as well. And I will see you in the next video. Take care.